it is, wherever you might be. Welcome to Ore-atory. I have my guest, Stephen Dummitt, with me from Tradewinds Leadership again as we continue in our May monthly or our monthly May series where we're doing every week a different stigma myth of mental health. So, welcome.
Thank you once again for having me, round three. And I'm excited for this one, just like I was for the first and second, and I will be for the fourth and fifth podcast.
I love it. Well, today we get to dig into a new topic. So we are on what, Stigma Lie 2?
We are on Stigma Lie number two. That is correct.
You're
You are
not allowed to
not
make
allowed
mistakes.
to make mistakes.
Well, let's talk about that.
Yeah. Uh, Out the gate, we call them stigma lies because they are lies. And the lie is that you are not allowed to make mistakes. And the reason that we call it that is because if we're not making mistakes, there is no way that we are fully taking advantage of the learning process. Learning is almost kind of intertwined with doing something wrong, doing something incorrectly as part of the learning process to learn how to do it correctly. And when we have this idea that we're not allowed to make mistakes and we focus in on having to be perfect every time, we are missing a huge part of the learning process. And we're also missing a huge part about how we build trust in a team, how we establish trust between a leader or a supervisor and a foreman and a member of the team. And if we perpetuate that lie, that's going to be no good for trust building and no good for effectiveness on a team. It's not going to bode well for anybody's mental health. And we're probably not going to learn a ton of things.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that I carry with me all of the time is sort of if you want to make a friend ask a favor. And I think the same thing that applies in a new role, right? And so
Mhm.
if you show up and you assume you know everything and that you have to know everything, just as you said, there's nothing left to learn. And so sometimes my first question, and as a consultant, I have a lot of first days. My first question is like, tell me what I don't know. Like, what questions should I be asking? Or help me out with X, Y, and Z. I haven't done that before. And it's a really disarming tactic, I think, for others that I'm getting to deal with. Sure, they expect that I know a lot of things coming in, but you know, not all of them. And so when I say, "Hey, tell me what I don't know or what do I need to know so I could be successful for you," it shortens my learning curve significantly. And so I almost always lead off with that, but I realize that many people don't.
That's correct, and especially in the world of construction that
Yeah.
I'm intimately related to. Grew up in construction family, was a construction worker myself, and I was a subcontractor and business owner doing electrical work, and so I saw how this lie showed up. And I wish I could have seen it then when I was doing it. That's
Yeah.
the advantage of sitting where I'm at now, is I can look back on all of that experience and I can pick out the pieces and see what went well, what needed improvement, and
Yeah.
I can now clearly see hindsight's always 2020, right? Or if not better,
Yeah.
that this perpetuating this lie that you're not allowed to make mistakes.
Yeah.
I remember one particular instance. I was working at a winery and they had a bunch of motor starter controls and fancy equipment. And they had to get this particular relay wired in. And the whole thing is high voltage. So for any Sparkies out there, this was 480-volt system. So this is not the stuff that you have in your house. So if you get zapped by this, it's going to put you through a wall.
Whew.
It's gonna sting real good. And I'm working on this relay and I'm trying to get it wired and I'm kind of confused and I'm doing my best and I'm calling my resources saying, hey, here's what I have. I'm taking pictures. I'm trying to get those answers. I'm trying to get the best information I can. And one of those resources was my father. And so my dad's a lifelong electrician, master electrician. Who better might have the answer? And the whole conversation came down to give it your best shot, do it the best way you know how. I'm not there, and I'm not always going to be here to answer your questions.
Yeah.
And if it works, it works. And if you blow it up, you blow it up. At least you'll learn what you did wrong, and you can go back out tomorrow and you can replace it. So
A little scary, but also
a little scary.
empowering you to do that.
Right. So I gave it a go. I wired it. I followed the wires. I gave it my best go. I went over to the panel and I put that breaker on, and boom, and the whole building shook. I got it wrong. I made a mistake. And so I went back and I look at what part of it had fused and arced and blown up, and I quickly realized what I did wrong and how I got it wrong. And so I called my father right back and said, "Well, I blew it up." And he's like, "Okay, did you learn what you did wrong so you can do it right the next time?" I said, "I absolutely did." He said,
Yeah.
"Okay, well, we'll just chalk that up to a learning lesson."
Yeah.
But I was allowed to give it a go and make a mistake. And I never wired one of those things wrong again. And in fact, it taught me how to be very careful and very meticulous on wiring other similar kind of systems moving forward.
Yeah.
But I was allowed to make the mistake, which allowed me the ability to learn.
Yeah.
Someone could have
Well,
walked me through it and gave me the answers. I don't know if I would have had the learning in that moment. They would have given it to me.
yeah, that's exactly right. And I feel like oftentimes we get so busy and so focused on what needs to be done that we lose that teaching moment. We lose that opportunity to say, "Hey, I'm going to let you go and figure this out, and I'll be there to be a backup or whatever. But it's okay to make a mistake, and
Mhm.
I'll help you sort it out." And instead, as leaders, managers, anybody in the field, we just do it for them or show them how to do it so that we don't have to deal with the inconvenience or whatever that might look like. And it's a huge disservice. And so I think this is a good reminder for individuals who have teams who need to learn something. Don't just do it for them. Give them the opportunity to sort through the problem and figure it out.
Absolutely. I love a phrase that you just used in there, and it's one that a coach I've worked with uses often. Teachable moment.
Yeah,
Can we find the opportunity to create teachable moments?
yeah,
And definitely, when someone gives you the answer, the way I like to phrase it is when someone gives you the answer when you don't know, they're teaching you how to do. What's more important and what's actually more beneficial for everyone is teaching somebody how you think.
yeah.
So, yes, let's get to the doing, but here's the thought process I went through to get to that answer. And that's going to be something that serves that person time and time again as you're working on a team.
I find this really fascinating because I was at a conference this past December and we were talking about workforce basically.
Mhm,
And what are some of the things that we always see in job descriptions, but like don't have a very good explanation for?
mhm,
And one of those components was being a problem solver. And they're like, I see being a problem solver in every job description. And it's true. I don't care what level you are, we toss problem
mhm.
solver in there. But how often can you say you're a great problem solver without having these teachable moments and the opportunity to go and not get it right and figure out what you've done wrong or how to improve it? Are you going to sneeze? You can sneeze.
I
It's
got it.
totally
I caught
fine.
it. I had an itch in there, though.
I was at the dentist and I needed to sneeze, and I was like, "Oh my god, what am I gonna do?" Like, but you can't even tell them. They're like, "Ah!" So anyway, that's for our live members here today. So
Mhm.
we're humans. But yeah, I think, we have the idea that we are gonna have a hugely dynamic workforce that's problem solvers, that's forward looking and all of this stuff. But unless you practice that as a leader and a manager and part of a team every single day to learn from one another, to fail together, to succeed together, that doesn't happen.
Exactly. And always right. This is May, and this is Mental Health Awareness Month, and why we're having these podcasts. And it's very difficult to sometimes talk about those things. That's why
Yeah,
talk is tough. Name of the podcast here for this series. But when we are taking that opportunity to be a leader and to find a teachable moment, to teach someone how to think, to allow them enough rope or leash to make the mistake, that how that works is that starts to build that trust on a team. And when you start building trust, the foundation of everything, I'm now more inclined to have better communication with that team member, or that team member now to me as a leader. And as we start to add the communication, that builds more connection on the team. And all of these things are going to add to lowering the amount of stress.
Yeah.
If I'm so concerned that I can't make a mistake and that I have to be perfect and that I'm going to get fired for this, or I'm never going to move up in the team, or everyone's going to think less of me if I get this thing wrong,
Yeah.
that's a huge weight to take on.
It
And
is.
that is adding to our stress, which is our how we handle stress. Our level of stress management is a direct correlate to our mental health.
Yeah.
And so that's how something as simple as being allowed to make mistakes plays into our overall mental health. If we're
Yeah.
so nervous about making a mistake, we're not really paying attention to maybe everything that's going on around us. Maybe we're not paying attention to the teammate next to us that's maybe in electrical worlds working on a circuit that he thinks is dead and it's not dead, or I don't know that it's turned off, or we haven't put a safety ground on it, right? Or we're not paying attention to those other teammates that
Yeah.
might be in a physically unsafe environment or potentially doing something that could lead to a dangerous event.
Yeah.
If we're so focused on making sure I get this thing perfect, we're putting the blinders on to the rest of the world around us.
Yeah.
And so physical safety is something that can be affected by this idea of having to be perfect. And
Yeah.
once we remove that layer of we have to do it and we're allowed to make mistakes, we're going to take in the rest of our surroundings, the rest of our team, the rest of what's happening. Our awareness about everything else goes up.
Yeah.
And that is a huge improvement.
So, this makes me think about, I guess I'm trying to think of how to ask the question. If we're worried about making mistakes, how can we ask our leaders or our team members to be supportive so that we can learn if that's not already an environment that is sort of part of the culture of the organization that we're in?
I mean, that really, on a base level, comes down to how how effective is our communication.
Yeah.
The simple answer is communicate it. Then everyone says, "Okay, Stephen, great. That's like a nothing answer. How do I communicate it?"
Yeah.
And it's as simple as asking them how they learned. And hey, how many mistakes did you make in the process? Who was able to teach you? What was that experience like? Did you always know these things?
Yeah.
And it's sometimes we need reminders as humans that we all started from ground zero. No
Yeah.
matter what we're doing, what we're after, what pathway we're on, or how advanced we are in it. We're 30 years deep in a career and in a trade journeyman of whatever the trade is. We started from nothing. We
Hmm.
all had to start somewhere. And sometimes just a subtle reminder about that can really, really cue that in. So you can say the phrase, hey, you had to start from somewhere. It's going to end
Not
in a
helpful.
period. That's a statement. It's semi aggressive. But when you start to get curious and ask a question like, who helped teach you this?
Hmm.
How many mistakes did you make along the way? Now it's in the question format. Now we're inspiring a conversation because we're trying to get them to communicate and answer back to us.
Yeah.
And so going about it where we're creating a conversation and reminding them that we're trying to learn that we want to get to where they are one day. And even a nod to respect to where they're at and the status they have and the education they have.
Yeah.
That hey, they had to do I'm not sure what they had to face to get there, but there had to be learning. I'm in the learning process and I want to get there too.
Yeah. I think that that's a really good point, and it's important to be disarming, right? I think that sometimes when we're in a situation where we feel the pressure to get it right or not fail or not make a mistake, that we're nervous to ask questions, but that to disarm the individual that we're talking to rather than be defensive if we mess up and
Mhm,
say like, well, you didn't teach me how, right? Then it's pointing out two failures. One, I
mhm,
failed and my leader failed, and that's generally not constructive. And so I love that you gave some very easy ways of talking to somebody and being disarming, like, hey, you're great at this, you've done it a really long time, how can I learn so that I can do this like you, or how can I avoid making mistakes, what taught you this? And that I think is a really nice way. But also, you have to sort of acknowledge that a lot of the people that are out there that we all gravitate towards and enjoy being with are those that are inquisitive and naturally curious and ask really good questions. And
Mhm.
it doesn't always come naturally to everyone. I think sometimes people are observers or they have a different learning style and, they don't ask all those things first pass. It takes them time to build that trust with the individual or the person. And that can be another kind of pressure that we put on ourselves, right? And so having any kind of tools to combat that and to reduce our stress and mental load might be a nice thing. What do you think in terms of like if you're nervous or if you're shy or how do you how do you get better at this? I mean, practice is probably one thing, but how when you're not inclined to speak up, how do you make this happen for yourself?
Yeah, great question, by the way. Thank you. And I really do think it still drives right back to this idea of not making mistakes. So
Yeah.
we don't want to make a mistake in the thing that we're doing, but we also don't want to ask the wrong question. So we don't want to make a mistake in the question that we're asking.
Yeah.
And this idea that we have to be perfect and like it we need to make mistakes. It's okay to make mistakes. Sometimes we need that mistake to get over it and get going. Kind of as you were asking the question, this a term came to my brain that I think a lot of us often suffer from, and it's analysis paralysis,
Yep.
right? Where we're heavily overthinking what is right, what is wrong, what's going to work, what's not going to work, who's going to say what, who's going to think about this thing differently if I say this answer. That whole time we're just spinning in our brain and we're not making any progress.
Yeah.
We're not getting any advancement. We're not getting any new information. We're not creating any new conversations. We're stagnant.
Yeah.
And if the amount of time that we spend in that analysis paralysis or saying, what are they going to think of me? Are they going to judge me for asking this question? Are they going to
Yep.
think I'm stupid? Are they going to think I'm an idiot or don't know anything? You could have already asked the question and gotten an answer, or asked the question that they said, well, maybe that means this, and it gets you to the second or third
Yep.
question, but you're starting the process of getting information and getting an answer,
Yeah.
or you're frozen and you're in your own internal world analyzing the thing. Again,
Yeah.
analysis paralysis.
Yeah. I think that's a beautiful point because I have sat in so many scenarios, whether it's a conference or whatever, and somebody says something and you want to ask more questions, but you're like, now isn't the time. And then you psych yourself out and don't ask it. And then by the time it's your turn to ask a question, you've just talked yourself out of a learning moment or whatever. So I have been there and done that. An example that really changed my perspective several years ago, I was onboarding a new team member to us, and I've done this a long time in terms of recruiting. And sometimes you forget the steps in what you're doing. And so when you're onboarding or training somebody, you're just going through the motions, but not necessarily doing it justice. And when somebody doesn't know, sharing all those. And so she said, "Hey, could you just back up for a second for me and walk me through it?" Like as weird as it sounds, she's like, "I just want to hear what you're thinking in each step."
Hmm.
And I was like, "Whoa, this is actually really hard." But she gave me that as a tool. She then gave me the opportunity to step back, reflect, understand why I'm doing what I'm doing, and how to teach her how to do it. And I was like, this is really great. I think at times you get busy and perhaps that's not what you want to do all day, but it was a really nice moment and she learned a ton from it as well. And so that brought us back to sort of ground zero and allowed us to work together and gave her the opportunity later on to say, "Hey, I know you do it this way, but I've been trying X, Y, and Z and teach me something." And so, I think that there's a lot of different ways that we can sort of communicate and reduce stress on ourselves specifically, but perhaps even on others by gifting the idea of communications and tools and other things. So I'm sure you find that a lot. I feel like in your practice, you're kind of arming everybody with a better set of tools.
That's the entire goal. That's the outcome I'm looking for is in any coaching session or any facilitation, can I give the recipient or recipients more communication tools in their
Yeah.
communication tool belt? That's a
Yeah.
win to me because once we're communicating better, we get all of the bonus effects from better communication.
Yeah.
And that's better team connection, better resilience, better stress management, all the way around to better mental
Yeah.
health. And as you were explaining that, kind of two thoughts popped in my mind. As a facilitator, I often encourage people to ask a lot of questions. And I'm sure we've all heard the phrase when you're in some kind of learning environment, some kind of training where they say there's no dumb questions. That the reason they're saying that is they want you to ask the question that might seem obvious, or you might have that judgment on yourself like, oh, this seems pretty simple, like I this is, this one's teed up, I should have this one. When the reality is, a better explanation is, if you think of a question, ask it, because I guarantee at least half of the room is thinking the same question.
Yeah.
And so I say it that way, and that seems to, again, that phrasing versus saying there's no dumb questions, just
Yeah.
saying, hey, if you got a question, go for it. I bet
Yeah.
half the room is already thinking it. Now it's going to promote that conversation and get the ball rolling a little bit.
Yeah.
And then another one that I want to share, because you shared one of yours, and I think it's great. And it's just a phrase that I will use sometimes. If I'm definitely not in the know, or I'm outside of my wheelhouse and I'm trying to learn, and I'm okay making mistakes. I preach this, so I got to live it.
Yeah.
But the phrase I'll use is explain it to me like I was five.
Yep.
And so I'll just say, hey, just I'm gonna take my own level way down, and
Yep.
I'll own that. Pretend I'm a 5-year old, and now
Yep.
explain it to me.
Yep.
And oftentimes that will get someone to get it down to the very general cliff note ideas,
Yeah.
and maybe let allow them that space to back up, like you were saying, like when you've been in it for 20, 30 years, you kind of forget those first learning steps, and now
Yeah.
it's, you know it as well as the back of your hand.
Yeah.
So explain it to me like I'm five, and it's like, let's just slow this whole thing down real quick
Yeah.
and get down to the brass tacks and get a foundation of an answer that I can grab onto. Okay, now I
Yep.
see what you're saying, and then I can start adding the pieces back. So a great tool out there is to use that phrase.
I appreciate that, and I've been in sessions where people sort of start off with like, "Look, as your question surfaces, ask it,
Mhm.
because it's important not just for you, but for everybody." And sure, I may have planned on covering it, but like, you'll lose that question sometimes if you don't just go for it. So, I also like that one a lot. Um, Thinking about sort of some of the internal stressors and the moments that we experience as we're trying not to fail or make
Mhm.
mistakes. I think that there are ones that everybody sort of experiences, but I guess, how by not allowing ourselves to fail, by not asking questions, obviously that takes a huge mental toll. When you're already in that cycle, how do you break out of it?
When you're already kind of stuck in that cycle of that.
Like, you haven't allowed yourself to ask questions, you're feeling kind of beat up, you haven't been the person that shows up to work and says, "Hey, explain this to me like I'm 5," or communicates what they're good at, what they're not good at, what they need to know more of. They've not asked for it. Now all of a sudden they've tuned into our podcast because they're like, "Man, I got to find a solution. How do I turn this around?" What is our magic answer?
Magic answer really is just, to me, a magic answer would be just swallowing your own pill of courage and taking
Yeah,
confidence to ask the first question. The most difficult step to take is the first step, whether we're learning something new, whether we're
yeah,
building a new company, whether we're innovating a new piece of robotics. And the first step creates the motion. And once you've got the motion going, it becomes a lot easier.
yeah,
So just get the first question out there.
yeah,
And you don't need to preface it with like, hey, this may be a dumb question, but, and then you fill in the question.
yeah,
Just say, I'm going to go ahead and ask this because I don't know the answer. And just own that you don't know it.
yeah,
And that's okay.
yeah,
And I think that's a message for people to take away from that. Just take the first step,
yeah,
ask the first question, you get the ball rolling, right? It's the whole like snowball from the top of the mountain kind of thing. Once it gets started, it's going to
yeah,
gain momentum, and then look out, and it's going to be this massive force coming down the mountain.
yeah,
And that's where we're actually now having great conversation. Information's exchanging. We're getting mutual understanding on both sides.
yeah,
Both people are learning. Every time someone has the knowledge base and is teaching it to somebody, they're actually reaffirming what they
yeah.
know and re explaining it to themselves.
Yeah.
In construction and in mining, retention is a huge
Yes.
one. And I know there's a huge statistic I saw. We'll have to look up. I don't know if we'll have available in this immediate live stat, but something about a significant portion of the mining workforce is set to retire in the next like 6 to 8 years.
55%.
There we go. See, there we go. I thought if I framed it up right, you'd have the stat for me. I remember I read it. I just didn't lock it in my brain. 55% of a workforce in any industry, more than half, is massive. And when you have that that subset of the workforce, these are people that are 30, 40 plus year masters at what they do.
Yeah.
And there's no education that can match someone that has done the thing for 40 years.
Yeah.
And how do we get that education passed down, which I think is a huge hurdle that we face. We definitely face
Yeah.
it in construction. Is how do we take these master carpenters, master electricians, master plumbers, and get them to want to share that information down to the next generation, or even the newest crop
Yeah.
of workers, of workforce coming in. And I think a lot of it is around what we're talking about. And if we don't have the courage to ask that first question, to take that first step as as a green worker in whatever trade it is, we're never going to start acquiring that knowledge. And we've given a couple tools in this podcast already. If you're nervous to ask the question, spotlight the person. That's that's
Yep.
that, that's the term that we call it. Spotlight them. Make them seem.
Excuse me. See, I couldn't help
There
myself.
we go. It was contagious. It came through the camera somehow, right? But
I
if we
guess so.
if
Sorry
we
about that.
that's okay. If we spotlight that person that is the master, whatever tradesman they are, and say, you have this amazing wealth of knowledge. I look up to you. I hope I can be as skillful as you are one day. I would
Yeah.
love to learn these things from you. That's a nod to respect. Who doesn't want to receive that kind
Yeah.
of admiration, right?
Yeah.
We're talking construction, so I don't want to call it flattery.
Yeah, we have to. We've been talking a lot about using the right words and framing it, right? And so, just like there are no dumb questions, maybe we don't want to say too much about flattery, but the opposite side of this that I also find that works really well, especially if somebody is reluctant to share their knowledge.
Mhm,
And as we're talking about, we've got a large population of individuals looking to retire, construction, mining, et cetera. I think part of this is sometimes saying, I want to be better at whatever it is I'm doing.
mhm,
Can you help me? I haven't asked enough questions. I'm really curious about X, Y, and Z. You're great at it. And like, then one, you want to be better. And two, you're calling them out for being great. And I find that like a lot of managers who don't always want to share their nuggets or their wins or how to do it exactly respond really well to individuals that say, I want to learn, I want to be better. And so I found that to be immensely helpful.
mhm. I think that sharing, that willingness to learn, that
Yeah.
desire to gain the knowledge, coupled with the respect and the admiration, really opens the doors
Yeah.
to be able to communicate.
Yeah.
That's a communication tool. That's setting the environment with communication, with the proper words to start the learning process. Again, coming from the trades, if I had a brand new employee that was there and this was just their job, their 7 to 3:30,
Yeah.
and this wasn't a career for them, and they really weren't interested in learning anything, my interest in wanting to teach them, I would match that level. If they
Yeah.
don't have an interest in learning, I don't have an interest in teaching. Wow, we just got fired up. I
You
must have
gotta
a really
love
good
when like
quote
the
there.
that was such a good moment, Stephen.
Right? That's really how it works. So from either level, if you have an interest in learning, share that interest, and
Yeah,
the person that has the knowledge will probably want to match you there.
yeah,
And if you have all the skills and that person doesn't want to learn, who wants to teach someone that doesn't want to learn? That's a
yes,
very difficult hurdle or bridge to cross.
yep. Well, and it wears on everybody, right? I mean, we're talking about mental health, and I think like this cuts across, any level that you may be at in an organization or a team, et cetera. It's sort of like, setting the stage for, as we've called it before, psychological safety or a culture where you can communicate openly and candidly, it makes everybody feel better. And the work from there sort of drives itself, and the results are enhanced ultimately. And so, you know, for those of you who have not joined us previously, a lot of what we're talking about is trying to create a culture in an organization where people can be vulnerable and open and talk about their mental health and struggles and wins and everything else. And so, not to kind of go back on everything that we've talked about so far, Stephen, but all of this enhances psychological safety and team culture.
Mhm.
But are there any specifics in this that we should be like paying attention to, or that we should do like as a call out, sort of, or a spotlight, as you said, on a manager that help the psychological safety improve or the team dynamic improve by, you know, failing? Like, what should
Yeah.
we be talking about?
It's if we're going to use the term psychological safety, and I love using the term, that's kind of a broader box, if you will, that has smaller components within it. And we've touched on a few of them already. And last week we touched on inclusion safety, which is being a part of the team
Yeah,
and the stigma lie related to that. And now we're talking about this. The second one is learner safety.
yeah,
And that's, do I feel safe in this environment to make mistakes, right? That way I can learn.
yeah,
And if I haven't established that on a team, if I haven't made that part of my team culture as a leader, then a lot of learning isn't taking place.
yeah,
And so when we want to start building trust and communication pathways, that comes through, we have to include people on our team, and we have to provide them a place that feels safe to learn. We
yeah,
talked a little bit about the learning zones last
yep,
time. So, right, we have our comfort zone, zone one, then we have learning zone, and then we have the danger zone.
yep,
Sometimes the learning zone is again labeled the growth zone. If we don't have the safety to step into that zone for fear of consequence,
right,
this is around stigma lies, right? Stigma is the fear of consequence, that I'm going to be punished for not knowing, that I'm
yeah,
going to be punished for not being able to do this already when everyone else can do this, but I haven't been taught how. Why would I be punished? If
yeah,
I don't have the safety to learn, I'm not going to vocalize that I don't know what's going on. I
yeah,
might even just fake it till I make it and just take the tool, take the item, and try to get it right. And I could cause damage to equipment. I could cause damage to myself. I could cause damage and harm to teammates,
yep,
let alone there's a burden to take all that on emotionally.
yeah,
And that's where the mental health piece comes into it.
yeah,
So if we're not establishing this idea that it's safe to learn on our teams, and that's the people, of all the people we want to learn in front of, it's the people on our teams that
yeah,
have our back, that have our support, and we probably have the educated master skilled journeyman that knows what they're doing, the teacher. That's the environment and the pieces of the environment I want to learn in. I don't want to go
yeah,
learn on my own.
yeah,
It's a team. It should be
yeah,
a team effort, right?
yeah. Well, and I think like you sort of highlighted this really nicely. So if we have to look at this from like a stepping stone perspective, we have last week where you come in and you're part of the team.
Mhm.
Therefore, we've established that there's some level of psychological safety, that there's some level of being part of this. And then that sets the stage for part two, where you can fail and learn and ask questions, and you're already in that phase one of learning rather than being in a spot where you can't do it. And so I'm sort of seeing these build off of one another. So I'm sure you may have done that deliberately.
Maybe, just maybe.
Maybe,
And that's,
maybe.
yeah, you can't really get to step two without having accomplished or addressed step
Yep,
one and gone about doing something to make them feel safe like they belong on the team.
yep,
Again, stigma lie number one is you have to earn your spot. And
yep,
that's the lie. You belong on the team because you got hired and put on the team already.
yep,
So we want that level of psychological safety
yep,
and physical safety on the team. Now we can take the second step, and that's the willingness to learn, right?
yep.
Now the lie like you have, you're not allowed to make mistakes. Well, how does anybody learn without making mistakes?
Yep.
It's not possible. A great analogy I always use, or a question I ask people, I say, if you didn't crash and burn riding a bicycle, did you really learn how to ride a bike? Like,
You must have been really lucky, I have to say.
I, I, I sure didn't make it without crashing. I still
Either.
crash.
Yeah. No, I lived on a hill and, basically there was a lot of gravity and, like, just hold on for dear life, and, that ended painfully multiple times.
hmm So you made some mistakes and then you learned.
Yes, and I'm far more resilient for it.
Right. So, but
Um,
like you have the message there, the core message that mistakes are vital to
yep,
learning. They are part of the learning process. And when we don't create an environment in which we let people know that, we are stifling, we are
yeah,
hindering the learning process. And that team will not be able to grow as fast. They will not be able to become as effective and efficient as they can be if we're holding that process back.
yep. I mean, figuring out how to make mistakes and learn and grow from them as a team. And sometimes by sharing the mistakes or the learnings from the mistakes with others, you know, short circuits their ability or need to make them as well, right? And so I think that sometimes that's also a takeaway. Like, um, I had a person on a panel and they said, you know, they talked about every week what was the peak and the pit, and sometimes, you know, what did you learn from all of that? And sharing that with everybody kind of gives them one, the foundation to share and have psychological safety and talk about the good parts and the bad parts. But I really loved that because it allowed everybody else to say, like, oh man, I I won't do it that way then. Like now I've learned that the software doesn't work that way, or that, you know, this thing's going to blow up, or whatever it may be. And so I like that they did that on like a weekly basis just as an activity. And I was like, I'm gonna have to steal
Mhm.
that.
It's great. And I think that approach when people want to present and say, learn from my mistakes so you don't make these mistakes.
Yeah,
And if we're going to be specific about words, that's phrased a certain way.
yeah,
It's not learn from my mistakes so you don't make a mistake.
yeah,
It's learn from my mistakes so you don't make these mistakes. So
yeah,
you can keep going and get to the higher level, the next step, where you'll probably make more mistakes because you're going to learn more.
yeah.
And really, when you go to this like whole mistake idea,
Hmm.
I take it back to the root of the fact that we're humans. We are not perfect by nature. That's just, it is what it is. That is my belief.
Yep,
I think it rings pretty true. We're going to make mistakes. And so every human that you work with on every team, on every level, is going to make mistakes and has made mistakes. And
yeah,
that's kind of the great equalizer that nobody out there is perfect and has been perfect. We have
yeah,
all made mistakes and we're all going to make more.
yeah. Well,
And it's okay.
and it's okay. And it's okay.
Mhm,
You know, I think it's one thing to to think that you're a perfectionist, but I think that even those of us, and I'm going to include myself in there because I like to turn in, you know, something that's great and glossy and perfect.
mhm,
You know, you realize, oh shoot, I could have done that better, and it's okay, right?
mhm.
And I've learned over the years that I have to kind of take a step back, and like it will never be perfect. I will always have another thought. Like, and that analysis paralysis, like you could put yourself in a very vicious cycle of trying to perfect whatever it is, or be whoever you think you should be at work. But I think sometimes having yourself or others on your team give you the permission to not do that and say, hey, it's all right. It looks great. Let's push it forward. Or, you know, it's okay to make that mistake and have the thing blow up. You'll learn something from it. You know, having that permission is a weight off a lot of people's shoulders. I know that I had that. And again, we've talked about coaching, but I had a coach be like, Lindsay, look, it's okay not to know all the answers. And that was the first time I had the permission. And it's been great. I
Yeah.
have felt a lot better since then, Stephen.
I think you're keying in on something that's super important to humans, and that's this idea of permission.
Yeah,
And a lot of times permission isn't this verbatim, very literal, I grant you permission. It's implied in a lot of
yeah,
places. And the more we can make teams feel that way, whether we're on the team, we're in charge of the team, wherever the position is, that idea of giving permission. A lot of times I will talk about, and for mental health, if you are on a team and your team lead, or again a super right, a frontline leader, and you've leaned into getting any kind of mental health help, right? Maybe you saw a
Yep.
counselor, maybe you saw a therapist, maybe you got together with a coach, even for one time. When you share the fact that you've done that, instead of saying, well, I can't let anyone know that I had to get help because I'm tough and I can do everything myself,
Right.
when you share in that and say, yeah, everything stacked up against me for a time and I really didn't know what to do, and I needed another person, I needed assistance, and you share that story, you just gave permission to anyone you've shared the story with that might be thinking the same thing. Maybe they're sitting there internally saying, this is too much. I feel like I'm drowning on the inside. I don't know what to do, but I don't want anyone to think that I'm weak or that I
Yep.
have to get help or I need help. I'm
Yep.
less than. When you share that, yeah, I took this step and my life was better because of it, and I can now lead more effectively and
Yeah.
be a better leader and be more aware and support my team more efficiently, more effectively
Yep.
because I got help. That is adding to that person. That's not
Yeah.
taking away from that person. And you're giving permission for anyone that's on the fence or
Yeah.
thinking about it to say, well, maybe I'll go ahead and make that call and see if it helps me like it helped so and so.
Yeah.
So this
Well,
idea of
and
permission is really big in there.
I I I think permission, as you said, sort of implied permission as well as just outward permission. Like sometimes we need to get whacked in the head with it. At least I do. But, I think we had talked early on, maybe our first episode together, there was a statistic about EAPs and how underutilized they are. And I don't remember what that number was. Do you?
This one I have.
Oh, good.
4.9% is
Okay.
the average national usage for EAP programs.
Which is just crazy to me.
Yeah.
I mean, I have my own company and it's small and I don't have an EAP, but if I did, I would love to use it. But even as we're talking about permission, as we're talking about psychological safety, as we're talking about utilizing tools that are at our fingertips in some cases, an EAP may be the first touch that you have with coach or with a counselor or with outside perspective on it. And I don't want to glaze over the fact that not enough people are talking about it, and as you said, talk is tough, and I think that the more we are honest about our experiences as humans at work and personally, the better off we will be, and perhaps we'll see that rate of utilization for EAPs go up, and I would love to see that.
I agree with you in full. I would love
Yeah,
to watch that number climb to even 5.9%, because that's
yeah,
going to be a massive increase when you think about the
the
size of the
number.
workforce, and that's all workforces
Yeah,
across the US. And
yeah,
so that is a whole new swath of people that are reaching out and getting the help that is likely going to help them.
yeah,
I heard a stat the other day in a mental health training. So I give them all the time. I sit in them all the time so I can constantly learn because I make mistakes and
yeah,
I want to learn and get better.
yeah.
And it was a percentage that 90%, 90% of people that see a therapist, it turns out successful for them,
Wow.
which is massive. And that,
Yeah,
that is huge. And that's usually because it's a outside voice. It's
yeah,
an outside opinion. It's someone else you could bounce ideas off of. And more importantly, it's because that person that was seeking the help or seeking the therapist or the counselor finally communicated,
yeah,
finally used words, finally vocalized and
yeah.
put it anywhere outside of their physical body. Because when you haven't done that, you're holding it all in.
Yep,
And so I'm just like a 90% success rate of improvement in life.
yeah.
I don't know if people hear that stat enough. That's
It's a
huge.
powerful statistic.
Hmm. And
I
so
appreciate your
that's,
sharing it. I would have had no idea that I mean, I think that it's impactful for sure. Having been through it myself on multiple occasions,
mhm.
I would be part of the 90%. but I guess I've never framed it that way before. So that's a good one.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm
Wow.
I'm very open and let people know all the
Yeah.
time that I would not be sitting where I am right now having a podcast with you had I not
Yeah.
went out and had the courage to reach out to get a coach, a
Yeah.
development coach for myself, and say that I need help developing. I
Yeah.
want to improve, and I don't know how to take the next step or what to do.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Well, again, it's and sometimes I think once we finally do ask that question, that like everything else that follows, you're sort of on a track. You've asked the question, you've opened that Pandora's box, and sometimes it can put you into that what's the third zone? Danger zone?
Danger zone,
Where you're
yes.
like, "Oh my god, I took on too much." But that doesn't preclude that you can step back a little bit and say like, "Okay, let's rein it in, and I'm gonna stay in this learning zone and continue down this path." But sometimes coach, counseling, whatever it is, gets you to that spot where you feel safe and supported and can explore that without getting in your own way, or telling yourself any story that may be self-limiting for who knows what reason. But
Yeah.
I think we all do that. So I love the opportunity to be coached or to have that accelerant, as we've said in the past, to success. We have roughly 10 minutes left. So I'm just going to put this out into the universe. I can't see who's with us on what streaming channel. I feel like, I'm not technologically advanced enough to understand all of the things that's going on, but I think that we're on multiple channels. So I'm going to say right now, with 10 minutes or so left in our conversation that's live today, if there are questions, please put them into the chat. We would love to respond to them. I should have said that early on, but we will be responsive to those. If anybody wants to type anything in, I'll be watching here on the side. So I may look a little bit crazy, but I will be paying attention. But otherwise, Stephen and I will just ramble on for the next 10 minutes
Yeah.
or so. But I also want to preface sort of what we're getting into for the rest of the month.
Mhm.
And so we have two more sessions. Is that
That
accurate?
that is
So we
correct.
have Stigma Lie 3 and 4 that we'll be covering from here. So next week we will have Stigma Lie 3. Only I have the answers,
That's right.
which is already baiting me for so many different
Right,
things.
right. Well, we'll save that one for the next session. That is where we're going though, and that's the next step in the ladder that we've kind of set up. So we'll explain that step, we'll explain that stigma lie and everything around it. I think
Okay.
while we're on this idea of mistakes, I think it's
Yes.
really important to bring up we talk about mistakes in the learning process and kind of this literal connection, and it does exist. But when you think about the most successful people in whatever they're doing, they probably made a ton of mistakes. Probably some of the most successful business people have blown up, ruined, and buried and shut down and bankrupt. I don't know how many businesses before they got to the successful one.
Sure.
You talk about, the invention of the light bulb, right? So we got Thomas Edison and the light bulb. Well, he figured out 1,000 ways not to make the light bulb before he figured out the way to make the light bulb. They
Yep.
talk about like in sports. So maybe it's Jordan, Michael Jordan, and all the accolades and awards that he's won. But they oftentimes don't talk about how many missed shots, how many
Yeah.
times he didn't make the game-winning shot. We see the highlight reel, but we don't see the low light reel of him losing 12 different games or a lot more.
Yep.
You go into baseball and you have like the home run kings and like Babe Ruth for all these home run records. Like, cool. Well, let's look at the strikeout records, and you'd
Yeah.
be surprised to see who tops those lists. The same people. So
Yeah.
that's where the greatness comes from. Still pursuing the thing and learning every time you make the mistake. There's a new way you can learn about it. There's a
Yeah.
new way you can think about it. It's adding to your perspective. It's adding to your awareness and your approach. And without mistakes, none of the greats that we know and whatever they're great at would be the greats.
Yeah. Well, and like you said, they wouldn't get there without making the mistakes, but also making them and sticking it out so that they can learn from them. And
Mhm.
several years ago, I don't remember which it was. There's a Malcolm Gladwell book. I want to say it's Outliers. And he put a statistic out that is not his, but generally it's 10,000 hours before you're really great at something.
Mhm.
And that often we don't stick it out that long to get great. we just think we're going to start there. And, I think that that self-induced perception or degree of pressure, is also not good for us. And so when we start reading and seeking alternative sources of information and recognizing like, man, sports greats, business people, whomever it is, they've made these mistakes. They've also practiced this for a really long time before they got good at it. And that is part of the journey, right?
Mhm.
And I think sometimes coming out of the gate just thinking we're going to be an expert at whatever it is because we've had success in other areas, that's not serving us.
Right.
So
There's
10,000
some,
hours before you're an expert.
yeah,
That's a
yeah.
lot of
There's
time.
something. There's definitely something to that. The sticking to it,
Yeah.
even when we're making mistake after mistake, still trying to learn, not getting frustrated, and if you're in an environment that doesn't support the making mistakes, that is only going to feed the shutting down or the quitting or the
Yep.
turning away from continuing to pursue it.
Yeah.
And that's again, we talk about resilience, right? And in the face of adversity, in the face of the unplanned event, we're going to keep moving forward. We're going to keep progressing. We're going to keep the team together. Is only bolstered and fostered by not letting stigma lie number two take hold.
Yeah.
You're not allowed to make mistakes.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad
If all those people that were great were shut down at their first mistake, we would never have even heard of them.
nobody would be an expert at anything.
No.
I mean, if we really go there, nobody would be great at anything.
True.
But I'm glad you pointed this out. But resilience is something that you talk about on your website and in all of your LinkedIn stuff. And I just find that we probably don't address true resilience well or often in most of a business or a work setting. And I love that you use the word, and I'm certain it's deliberate, but like,
Hmm.
can we unpack that a little bit? I realize this is a big
Yeah.
question as we like have 5 minutes or so,
Yeah.
but
I think a very concise way to do it is through a comparison. And a lot of times people will confuse resilience with enduring.
hmm
And just because you're continuing to endure a hardship or a pain or the failure, and you're in this maybe the state of suffering, that doesn't necessarily equal resilience.
right.
Resilience is more of an active approach. What are your tools? What are your outlets? What are your processes? Who are your people? Who is your support network
Yeah.
that are continuing to keep you in positive spirits and to rebound you and to convince you to keep going, to be that encouragement? So, on one side, you're not getting any of that and you're just suffering through it. That is the enduring side.
Yep.
When it's resilience, that's when we've built a connection with at least one other person that we're going through it with, or we're going through it for. And so there's similarities. If there was a Venn
hmm
diagram, there'd be some overlap here.
Yep.
But I think that resilience is really built through being connected to others,
Yeah.
and enduring and suffering, usually instead of connected, is more rooted in isolation.
Yeah. I appreciate your pointing that out. Because I don't know that I would necessarily have used those two words together. And I like that you sort of like gave me the visual of a Venn diagram to go with it. Um, because in my mind, resilience, I mean, now I'm sort of saying like thriving versus surviving, and like, I have all these other things kind of going in the back of my head, but I really like the concept of resilience, and I think there's so much value in it because you said it connects you with others that you're living with, working with, experiencing something with, so that there isn't that isolation in it. And I think sometimes, even if it's not the best case scenario that you're, you know, sorting your way through, you have someone else to do it with. And that is an awesome coping mechanism at times.
Right. And a very positive coping mechanism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, good. I like that we're leaving off on this high note, but I guess to prime everybody again, I've got to pull up my cheat sheet over here on the left. So next week we have Stigma Lie. Whoops, I increased it. So who knows what this is going to be. Stigma Lie number 3 next week, only I have the answers. And instead of on a Thursday, we will be doing it on a Friday because I will be traveling in advance of that. So tune in next Friday, which I think is the 22nd, at 3 p.m. Mountain Time. And we will look forward to seeing you guys then. Of course, would love participation and, any questions that you may have. But in the meantime, feel free to put things in the comments, send Stephen or I an email or a message on LinkedIn, and we will, of course, be responsive. And thank you so much, Stephen, for being
Yeah,
here and giving us these amazing insights and ways of sort of dealing with what the world tosses at us at work and otherwise. So thank you so much.
absolutely. Thank you for having me. And to follow one of the thought leaders that I very much enjoy, Brene Brown, and one of her phrases is clear is kind. I'm going to go ahead and be clear that the date is the 23rd of May.
Ah, thank
Friday
you.
22nd was the Thursday we had planned. So, in case the viewers out there hearing it, it
Yes.
is the 23rd for Friday.
Friday the 23rd at 3 p.m. Mountain Time. We will have Stigma Lie number 3. Thank you, Stephen.
All right.
We'll
Perfect.
be here.
Yeah.
Hopefully, you guys will too. So, thank you so much again for joining us. And, Stephen, as always, I will talk to you soon. And thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.